Fix this engine and you get my job. The millionaire laughed, but the humble mechanic shocked everyone. Support the channel by hitting that like button and write in the comments the name of the city where you're watching from. And let's dive into our story. The bitter scent of burnt coffee, mixed with expensive leather and harsh fluorescent lighting, filled the 42nd floor boardroom of Sterling Automotive Industries, while the distant hum of Manhattan traffic created a restless backdrop to the crisis unfolding behind the steel and glass walls. Victoria Sterling pressed her fingertips against her temples, feeling every one of her 38 years weighing down like lead anchors. The charcoal grey power suit she wore had been her armor through countless battles in the male-dominated automotive industry, but today it felt as fragile as tissue paper against the catastrophe threatening to obliterate everything she'd fought to build since her bitter divorce 3 years ago. "Gentlemen," Victoria's voice cut through the tension like a blade, "I need absolute honesty right now. In 8 hours, the most important investors in our company's history will walk through those doors, expecting to see the revolutionary prototype that's supposed to secure our future. Instead, we have a $75 million paperweight that won't even turn over. I want to know exactly what went wrong, and more importantly, I want solutions." Richard Blackwood, the 51-year-old head of engineering, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses for the 5th time in 10 minutes. A nervous habit that betrayed his growing panic despite his attempts to maintain professional composure. His expensive Italian suit couldn't hide the sweat stains forming under his arms. "Victoria, with all due respect, our top specialists have been working around the clock for 4 straight days. We've replaced every major component, run diagnostics on every system, consulted with the German manufacturers. This isn't a simple mechanical failure we're dealing with." "A simple mechanical failure?" Victoria stood abruptly, her chair spinning backward with enough force to hit the wall. "Richard, there's nothing simple about a prototype that costs more than most people's houses suddenly dying without explanation. We've got board members breathing down my neck, shareholders demanding answers, and a presentation that could make or break this company in less than 8 hours." The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the soft whir of the air conditioning and the distant sound of construction work that never seemed to stop in the city. The other 6 executives around the mahogany conference table studied their hands, their phones, anything to avoid Victoria's piercing gaze. "Look." Victoria walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, watching the afternoon shadows stretch across the city like dark fingers. "I know exactly what every single person in this building thinks about me. The divorced woman who got lucky in the settlement, the outsider who doesn't belong in a man's world, the pretender who's in way over her head." James Crawford, the chief financial officer, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Victoria, nobody here thinks—" Don't lie to me, James." Victoria turned back to face them, her green eyes blazing with a mixture of frustration and determination. "I've heard the whispers in the hallways. I've seen the eye rolls when I make decisions. I know some of you are just waiting for me to fail, so you can say you told them so." She moved closer to the table, placing both hands flat on the polished surface, her voice dropping to a tone that commanded absolute attention. "But here's what you might not know about me. My ex-husband didn't leave me this company out of guilt or generosity. He left it to me because during 15 years of marriage, I was the one who negotiated every major contract. I was the one who identified market opportunities. I was the one who understood the numbers when all he cared about was horsepower and chrome." Richard bristled visibly, his face flushing red. "Victoria, we appreciate your business acumen, but this is a highly technical engineering problem. Our team has exhausted every conventional approach. The prototype simply isn't responding to any standard diagnostic procedures." "And what exactly are you suggesting we do?" Victoria crossed her arms, her posture radiating challenge. "Cancel the presentation. Tell Nakamura Industries that we've wasted their time. Declare bankruptcy and close the doors on 800 employees. Perhaps we could, began Michael Torres, the head of marketing, but his voice trailed off when Victoria's attention shifted to him. Perhaps what, Michael? Perhaps we should admit we're incompetent. Perhaps we should accept that we've promised something we can't deliver. The atmosphere in the room grew thick with tension and barely contained panic. The smell of expensive cologne mixed with anxiety sweat created an almost nauseating combination. These were men accustomed to success, to having answers, to being in control, and the complete helplessness of their situation was eating at them like acid. It was at that moment of peak desperation that the boardroom door opened without warning, and a figure nobody expected appeared in the doorway. Ryan Mitchell, the building's garage mechanic, stood there in his navy blue coveralls stained with honest grease, holding a wrench in one hand and a diagnostic scanner in the other. His dark hair was slightly mussed from working under car hoods all morning, and there was a smudge of motor oil on his left cheekbone, but his hazel eyes held an intelligence that seemed completely at odds with his blue-collar appearance. "I apologize for interrupting," Ryan said, his voice calm and measured, "but I couldn't help overhearing some of the discussion from the hallway. Are you talking about the prototype in Lab 7? The silence that followed was so complete, it seemed to absorb sound itself. 7 pairs of eyes locked onto Ryan as if he'd materialized from another dimension. Richard was the first to react, his face turning an even deeper shade of red. "What the hell are you doing in here?" Richard shot to his feet, knocking over his coffee cup and sending brown liquid spreading across important documents. "Who gave you permission to enter a board meeting? Get out before I call security." But Victoria held up her hand, the same commanding gesture she'd used to silence hostile takeover attempts and condescending investors. There was something about the way Ryan had said Lab 7 that caught her attention. Not the casual reference of a maintenance worker, but the specific familiarity of someone who knew exactly what he was talking about. "Wait, Richard." Victoria studied Ryan's face with growing curiosity. "Ryan, isn't it? You've been working in our building's garage for about 2 years now?" 2 years and 7 months, Miss Sterling," Ryan replied respectfully, but without subservience. "And yes, I'm familiar with Lab 7 because I sometimes handle the environmental systems maintenance for the technical floors." "And what exactly do you know about our prototype?" Victoria asked, ignoring the incredulous stares from her executives. Ryan stepped further into the room, bringing with him the honest sense of clean motor oil and hard work. "I know it's a hybrid supercharged V8 with advanced electronic fuel injection and variable valve timing. And from what I've overheard from the technicians during their coffee breaks, it's been completely unresponsive for 4 days, despite functioning perfectly during initial testing." The executives exchanged glances of surprise. This wasn't the vocabulary they'd expect from a building maintenance worker. "Interesting." Victoria moved closer to Ryan, studying his face with growing intrigue. "And what do you think might be causing the problem?" "Ms. Sterling," Richard interrupted with barely contained outrage, "this is absolutely ridiculous. You can't seriously be asking for technical advice from a what, Richard?" Victoria turned on him with blazing eyes. "From a mechanic? From someone who actually works with his hands? From a person who might understand how machines really work instead of just reading about them in reports?" "With respect, Ms. Sterling," Ryan interjected diplomatically, "I understand Mr. Blackwood's concerns. It's natural to question input from someone like me on such advanced technology. But," he continued, turning to look directly at Victoria, "if I might make an observation, I believe the problem might not be in the engine's complexity, but in something much more fundamental that could have been overlooked during development." Victoria felt something stir in her chest, a spark of hope she hadn't felt in days. There was something about the way Ryan spoke, a quiet confidence that reminded her of her father when he used to explain complicated concepts with simple clarity. "Go on," she said. "Modern hybrid engines rely on perfect synchronization between multiple computer systems." Ryan explained, his hands moving instinctively as if describing invisible components. If the problem appeared suddenly after everything was working correctly, it's likely an issue with system communication protocols, not with the individual systems themselves. Communication protocols? James asked, clearly intrigued despite himself. The onboard computers, Ryan nodded. A hybrid engine has dozens of different computer modules that constantly share information about performance, efficiency, safety parameters. If one of those modules starts speaking a slightly different language than the others, the whole system can shut down to protect itself from damage. Richard let out a dismissive laugh. Young man, do you really think our engineers haven't checked the computer systems? Please don't insult our intelligence. I'm not trying to insult anyone, Ryan replied calmly. I'm just suggesting that maybe the problem is in a system that wouldn't be obvious to check. Something like the ambient temperature sensors or the fuel quality monitoring system. Fuel quality monitoring. Richard frowned. What does fuel quality have to do with a computer shutdown? Everything. Ryan smiled slightly. Modern hybrid engines constantly adjust their performance based on fuel octane ratings, ethanol content, even seasonal fuel additives. If the fuel quality sensor is giving incorrect readings, the computer might think it's running on the wrong type of fuel and shut everything down to prevent engine damage. The explanation hit the room like a revelation. Victoria watched the faces of her executives, seeing for the first time in days expressions that weren't pure despair. "And you know how to check this?" she asked. "I could try," Ryan answered honestly. "I can't promise miracles, but I can run some diagnostics on the fuel and environmental monitoring systems to see if there are any inconsistencies." Victoria looked at her watch. The hands seemed to be moving faster than usual, carrying her inexorably toward a meeting that could determine the fate of everything she'd worked for. It was an insane decision, a desperate gamble, but something deep in her gut, the same instinct that had helped her survive a vicious divorce and corporate sabotage, was screaming at her to trust this unassuming man. "Ryan," she said slowly, feeling the weight of the moment, "I'm about to make a proposal that's going to shock everyone in this room." Ryan looked at her with curious anticipation. "If you can get our prototype running, if you can accomplish the miracle that 4 days of expert engineering couldn't achieve." Victoria paused dramatically, aware that she was about to change the course of her life. "I'll give you my job as CEO of this company." The silence that followed was so absolute, it seemed to have physical weight. Richard's mouth fell open like a fish, gasping for air. James actually dropped his phone, and Michael looked like he'd forgotten how to breathe. "Victoria," Richard stammered, "you cannot be serious." "I have never been more serious in my entire life." Victoria crossed her arms, her gaze fixed on Ryan. "Well, mechanic, do you accept the challenge?" Ryan looked around the room full of suited executives staring at him like he was an alien specimen, then back at Victoria. There was something in the determination of this woman that impressed him deeply, a courage that contrasted sharply with the vulnerability she was trying to hide behind her corporate armor. "Miss Sterling," he said finally, "if it means helping, I accept the challenge, but I can only promise to give my absolute best effort." "That's all I need to hear." Victoria turned to Richard, who looked like he was having some kind of breakdown. "Richard, escort Ryan to Lab 7, and please let him work without interference." "Victoria, this is insanity," Richard protested. "You're betting the future of the company on a complete unknown." "Richard," Victoria said, her voice carrying an authority she rarely had to use, "my father always told me that when you're at rock bottom, you only have 2 choices, give up or bet everything on one last desperate play. I choose to bet." Ryan nodded and headed toward the door, followed by Richard muttering indignant protests under his breath. When they left, Victoria found herself alone with the other executives, who stared at her with expressions ranging from admiration to absolute terror. "Do you think I've lost my mind?" she asked, returning to her chair. Michael was the first to respond. "Victoria, with all due respect, You just wagered your career on a garage mechanic we barely know." "Exactly." Victoria smiled for the first time in days. "And you know why? Because sometimes the biggest victories come from the craziest risks. My father didn't build this company by playing it safe." Outside, the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor, carrying Ryan toward his appointment with Destiny. And Victoria, for the first time in 4 days, felt that maybe, just maybe, a miracle was about to happen on the 42nd floor of Sterling Automotive Industries. But could a simple garage mechanic really solve what the best engineers couldn't? And if he succeeded, would Victoria truly be willing to keep her impossible promise? The elevator descended from the 42nd floor to Lab 7 on the 20th floor, and the tension between Richard and Ryan was thick enough to cut with a knife. The polished steel walls reflected their uncomfortable silence as Richard watched Ryan through the mirrored surfaces, still unable to believe he was escorting a building maintenance worker to the most classified laboratory in the corporation. "Listen carefully, buddy," Richard said when they reached the 30th floor, his voice dripping with condescension. "I don't know what kind of smooth talk you used to fool Victoria, but I can spot a con artist from a mile away. You've got exactly 20 minutes to look at that engine, put on your little show, and then get back to changing oil in the garage where you belong." Ryan simply nodded, his eyes focused on the descending floor numbers. "Mr. Blackwood, I just want to help. If I can't solve the problem, at least we'll have tried another approach." "Another approach?" Richard let out a harsh laugh that echoed in the small space. "Kid, you have no idea what you're dealing with. That engine cost $75 million. It was designed by the top engineers in Germany and Japan, using technology you couldn't even pronounce. And you think you can fix it with a quick look?" The elevator stopped with a soft chime, and the doors opened to reveal a pristine white corridor filled with the scent of industrial cleaners and the steady hum of sophisticated electronic equipment. The walls were lined with reinforced glass windows through which various engines in different stages of development could be seen, displayed like precious artifacts in a high-tech museum. "Impressive," Ryan murmured, observing a V12 engine slowly rotating on a computerized platform, its titanium components reflecting the LED lighting like polished jewels. "Of course it's impressive," Richard replied with involuntary pride. "This is the technological heart of the company. Every engine you see here represents years of research and millions in investment." They walked down the corridor until they reached a larger room where a team of technicians in white lab coats moved around a central workstation like surgeons preparing for a critical operation. In the center, like a patient on an operating table, sat the prototype that had caused all the chaos. It was a masterpiece of automotive engineering, with its precision-machined aluminum components and wiring harnesses organized with surgical precision. "Dr. Patterson," Richard addressed the team leader, a tall, thin man with thick-rimmed glasses, "I'm bringing you a consultant that Victoria wants to examine our problematic patient." Dr. Patterson looked up from the diagnostic reports he was analyzing and studied Ryan from head to toe, noting the stained coveralls and work-calloused hands. "A consultant? From which university?" "From the School of Hard Knocks," Richard answered with barely concealed sarcasm. "Our friend here is the building's garage mechanic." The silence that followed was deeply uncomfortable. The 5 technicians present stopped what they were doing and turned to stare at Ryan as if he were an exotic zoo animal. Someone whispered something about practical jokes, and nervous chuckles rippled through the lab. "Excuse me," Ryan said calmly, approaching the workstation. "May I take a closer look?" Sure, Dr. Patterson said with poorly disguised condescension. "But please don't touch anything. Each component of this engine is worth more than most people's annual salary." Ryan approached the engine, and something remarkable happened. His entire demeanor transformed. His shoulders straightened, His gaze became laser-focused, and his hands, which moments before had seemed rough and clumsy, now moved with the precision of a master craftsman examining a priceless instrument. "Hybrid supercharged V8, 4.2 liters," Ryan murmured, circling the workstation slowly like a detective studying a crime scene. "Direct fuel injection, variable valve timing, twin-scroll turbochargers. Fascinating. You've implemented active aerodynamics integration with the engine management system." The technicians exchanged surprised glances at the precise technical vocabulary. Dr. Patterson raised an eyebrow with growing curiosity. "How do you know about the aerodynamics integration? Those specifications aren't in any external documentation." "May I?" Ryan pointed to a digital oscilloscope connected to the engine's computer system. With Dr. Patterson's reluctant permission, he began analyzing the waveforms and data streams displayed on the screen. You followed the European specifications exactly, didn't you?" "Obviously," Dr. Patterson responded with professional pride. "This engine was developed in partnership with Brenner Motorsport, the same company that supplies Formula One teams." "And did you test the fuel management system here in New York?" Ryan asked, still studying the diagnostic data like a scholar examining ancient manuscripts. "The fuel management was programmed exactly according to the European specifications," Richard interrupted impatiently. "Ryan, enough questions. Can you identify the problem or not?" Ryan stepped back from the workstation and crossed his arms thoughtfully. "Can I ask something that might sound strange? What octane rating is the fuel you're using for testing?" The question caught everyone off guard like an unexpected thunderclap. Dr. Patterson blinked in confusion. "Octane rating? We're using standard premium gasoline, 93 octane. Why would that matter? And what octane rating was the engine originally calibrated for in Europe?" "European fuel is different, kid," Richard said with growing impatience. "What does that have to do with anything? European premium gasoline typically runs 95 to 98 octane. Ryan responded calmly. "A difference of 2 to 5 octane points. Did you recalibrate the NOx sensors and timing maps to compensate for the lower octane fuel here in the States?" The silence in the lab became heavy as fog. Dr. Patterson opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. Richard blinked repeatedly as if trying to process information that didn't fit his worldview. "NOx sensors?" Dr. Patterson stuttered. "But the European specifications didn't mention—" "European specifications are designed for European fuel," Ryan explained patiently, like a teacher addressing eager students. "Lower octane fuel can cause pre-ignition and knocking in high-performance engines calibrated for higher octane. The engine's computer will shut everything down to prevent catastrophic damage. It's basic automotive chemistry." "Wait a minute," Richard interjected, his voice rising several octaves. "Are you suggesting that our engineering team, with decades of experience and degrees from the finest universities, overlooked something as elementary as fuel octane ratings?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Ryan replied diplomatically. "I'm simply proposing a possibility that might not have been considered during the adaptation process. Have you checked the NOx sensor logs and timing retard data?" Dr. Patterson frantically shuffled through the diagnostic reports, his hands trembling slightly like leaves in a breeze. The NOx sensors were set to European standards. 95 octane baseline sensitivity. For 93 octane American fuel, the sensitivity should be recalibrated to prevent false knock detection, Ryan said quietly. "A small difference in numbers, but enough to make the computer think the engine is destroying itself." The information hit the lab like a precision bomb. The technicians looked at each other with expressions of growing discomfort, and Richard appeared to be having some kind of nervous breakdown. Are you certain about this?" Dr. Patterson asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I can verify it if you'll allow me," Ryan answered. "I need a laptop with engine management software, access to the ECU, and about 30 minutes to check the fuel maps and knock thresholds." Richard was red with indignation like an overripe tomato. "This is absurd. You're saying that in 4 days of intensive work, our team didn't consider something so fundamental? Mr. Blackwood, with all respect, I'm not criticizing anyone. Mistakes happen, especially when working under extreme pressure. The important thing is solving the problem. One of the younger technicians cleared his throat timidly. Dr. Patterson, actually, I remember reading something about octane compatibility in a trade journal a few months ago, but I thought it didn't apply to our situation since the engine ran fine during initial testing. Dr. Patterson shot a withering look at the young technician, who immediately lowered his eyes like a scolded child. The tension in the lab was palpable, like a steel cable about to snap. "Very well," Dr. Patterson said finally, his voice controlled but tight as piano wire. "Let's test this theory. But I want to make absolutely clear that if you damage any component of this engine, you will be held personally and legally responsible." "Understood completely," Ryan nodded. "May I begin?" For the next 30 minutes, something extraordinary happened in Sterling Automotive's Lab 7. Ryan transformed completely before everyone's eyes. His hands moved with the precision of a heart surgeon, navigating complex diagnostic software and engine management systems with a familiarity that left everyone speechless. "Careful with the turbocharger pressure sensor," he muttered to himself, disconnecting a hair-thin wire, "and the variable valve timing actuator needs to be isolated before accessing the ECU like this." Richard watched in fascination, temporarily forgetting his initial irritation. There was something mesmerizing about the way Ryan worked, as if he and the engine were performing a perfectly choreographed mechanical ballet. "Found it," Ryan announced finally, pointing to cascading data on the laptop screen that looked like hieroglyphics to most observers. "The NOx sensors are configured for 95-octane fuel, but you're running 93-octane. The ECU is interpreting normal combustion as dangerous knocking and shutting down the engine to prevent damage." Dre. With smooth, confident movements, Ryan began adjusting parameters in the software, his fingers dancing across the keyboard like a pianist performing a complex sonata. "And you learned this where exactly?" Dr. Patterson asked, his initial hostility transforming into genuine curiosity. Ryan hesitated for a moment, as if the question brought back painful or complicated memories. "Practical experience, Doctor. 15 years working with high-performance engine management systems. But this specific knowledge about octane calibration in hybrid supercars," Dr. Patterson persisted, "this isn't something you learn in an ordinary garage." "No," Ryan admitted, his eyes becoming distant. "This is something you learn working with racing cars. Formula One specifically. When you're racing at Monaco, Silverstone, or Indianapolis, each track has different fuel specifications, different regulations. A tenth of a second can decide a championship, and sometimes that tenth comes from perfect fuel mapping and NOx sensor calibration." The revelation struck the lab like lightning. Richard's mouth fell open, but no sound came out. The technicians stared at each other with expressions of growing shock. "Formula One?" Dr. Patterson stammered. You worked in Formula One?" Ryan stopped typing and looked directly at Dr. Patterson. "I did, but that was a long time ago. Now how about we finish this calibration? The Japanese investors aren't going to wait forever." But Richard wasn't willing to let the subject drop. "Hold on a minute. You can't just casually mention Formula One experience and change the subject. Which team? When?" Ryan sighed deeply, clearly uncomfortable with the attention he'd attracted. "Mr. Blackwood, that's not important right now. What matters is getting this engine running." "It's important to me," Richard insisted. "You appear out of nowhere, solve in 30 minutes a problem our team couldn't crack in 4 days. And now it turns out you have Formula One experience. This can't be a coincidence." The phone on the wall rang at that precise moment, cutting through the tension like a buzzsaw. Dr. Patterson answered, spoke briefly, and hung up with a grave expression. "That was Victoria," he announced. "She wants to know how things are progressing down here. And," he hesitated, The Japanese delegation just called. They're arriving 2 hours early. The impact of the news was immediate and devastating. Richard went pale as a ghost. The technicians began whispering nervously among themselves, and even Ryan seemed to tense up. 2 hours early, Richard repeated in disbelief. That means we have less than 6 hours to have everything running perfectly. Ryan looked at the engine connected to diagnostic cables, calculating the time needed mentally. I can finish the recalibration in an hour if I have the right tools and nobody interrupts me. And if something goes wrong? Dr. Patterson asked. If you damage the engine trying to make these adjustments? Ryan met Dr. Patterson's gaze, and for the first time since entering the lab, his voice carried a weight of absolute, unquestionable authority. Dr. Patterson, I've calibrated engine management systems on cars worth 10 times more than this. Cars that needed to perform flawlessly at 200 miles per hour, where a mistake meant not just lost money, but human lives at risk. The statement hung in the air like a silent challenge. Richard studied Ryan's face, searching for signs of boasting, but found only unwavering determination. All right, Richard said finally. You have 1 hour. But if anything goes wrong, Ryan interrupted. You can hold me completely responsible. But if it goes right, he paused significantly. Maybe it's time for Victoria and all of you to reconsider some assumptions about who really understands engines in this company. And with that declaration loaded with mystery and promise, Ryan returned to work, leaving a lab full of degreed engineers, wondering who this mechanic really was, who had appeared from nowhere to challenge everything they thought they knew about technical expertise. 1 hour later, Sterling Automotive's Lab 7 had transformed into a theater of pure, electrifying tension. Victoria had arrived on the 20th floor, accompanied by the entire executive board, and now watched through the reinforced glass observation window as Ryan made the final adjustments to the engine management system. His movements were fluid and confident, like those of a master surgeon closing a delicate operation. Each gesture calculated and precise as a mechanical symphony. Unbelievable, murmured James, the CFO, wiping perspiration from his forehead with a handkerchief that was already soaked. In 1 hour, he's recalibrated a $75 million engine management system like it was his personal project car. Victoria pressed her palm against the cool glass, feeling the subtle vibration of the lab equipment resonating through the material. There was something almost magnetic about the way Ryan worked, an intimacy with technology that she had never witnessed before. Richard, do you still think he's a fraud? Richard, who had spent the last hour observing Ryan's every move with growing fascination and wounded pride, slowly shook his head. Victoria, I don't know what to think anymore. What I've seen today challenges everything I believed about technical competence and professional experience. On the other side of the glass, Ryan stepped away from the engine and carefully cleaned his hands with a pristine shop towel. His movements were slow, almost ceremonial, like a maestro who had just completed his masterpiece. He looked toward the group watching through the observation window and nodded, a simple gesture that carried the weight of a promise fulfilled. He's finished, Victoria whispered, feeling her heart racing like a high-performance engine. Dr. Patterson, start the engine. Dr. Patterson, who had spent the last hour alternating between skepticism and growing admiration, approached the control panel with hands that trembled slightly from adrenaline. Ms. Sterling, before we fire it up, I must say that what I've witnessed today is unlike anything I've experienced. The way he works, the technical knowledge he demonstrates, it's extraordinary. Dr. Patterson, Victoria said softly, start the engine, please. The doctor pressed the ignition sequence, and for a moment that seemed to last an eternity, only the hum of electronic equipment filled the silence. Then, like a heart returning to life after cardiac arrest, the engine roared to existence. The sound was perfection incarnate, not merely functional but absolutely flawless. A deep, powerful growl that vibrated through the walls like celestial music, making the water glasses on nearby tables ripple gently. It was the sound of $75 million functioning exactly as intended, the sound of the impossible made reality. "Dear God," James whispered, feeling his knees nearly buckle. He actually did it. He really did it. Victoria felt tears burning behind her eyes, but fought to contain them. It was more than relief. It was validation of something she hadn't even known she needed to prove to herself. Her instinct had been correct. Sometimes the most important solutions came from the most unexpected places. Ryan emerged from the testing chamber, removing his protective gloves, and was greeted by reverential silence. Every gaze was fixed on him, as if he were a magician who had just performed the most impossible trick in the universe. "The engine is running perfectly," he said with simplicity that contrasted sharply with the magnitude of his achievement. "The octane calibration resolved the fuel management issues. You can test it as extensively as you want." "Ryan," Victoria approached him, her voice heavy with emotion she struggled to control. "You just saved this company. You just saved thousands of jobs. How can I possibly thank you?" "No thanks necessary, Miss Sterling. I just did what I could to help." "What you could?" Richard interjected, still processing the reality of what he'd witnessed. "Ryan, what you accomplished today requires knowledge and experience that isn't acquired in an ordinary garage. Please, tell us who you really are." Ryan hesitated, looking around the room full of expectant faces. It was evident he disliked being the center of attention, but he also seemed to understand that the moment for revealing the truth had arrived like an inevitability. "My full name is Ryan Patrick Mitchell," he began slowly. "I'm 42 years old, and as I mentioned, I've been working with engines for over 20 years. But..." He paused, as if the next words were difficult to voice. "From 2005 to 2018, I was Chief Systems Engineer for Red Bull Racing in Formula One." The silence that followed was so complete, it seemed to have absorbed even the engine's purr. "Red Bull Racing?" Victoria repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "You worked for Red Bull Racing?" 13 years, Ryan confirmed. "I started as a junior technician and ended up as head of all hybrid power unit development. I was part of 4 World Championship campaigns, including the victories in 2010, 2011, 2012, and 2013. Richard leaned against the wall, visibly shaken. 4 World Championships. You're being serious. Completely serious. I can provide certifications and recommendation letters if necessary." Ryan responded with the same simplicity he might use to discuss the weather. "But how?" "Dr. Patterson stammered. "How does someone with that resume end up working in a building garage in Manhattan?" The question brought a shadow of deep sadness to Ryan's eyes. He looked out the window, observing the city sprawling to the horizon like an ocean of lights and life, before answering. "My mother became seriously ill in 2018, early-stage Parkinson's disease, but progressing rapidly. She had lived her entire life here in New York, alone since my father died, and had no one else but me." His voice became lower, heavy with emotion he fought to control. "Red Bull offered me extended leave, a remote consulting contract, but I knew my mother needed me close. Not weekly video calls or quick weekend visits. She needed her son." Victoria felt a knot forming in her throat. There was something deeply moving about the way Ryan spoke about his mother, a reverence that contrasted with the technical authority he had demonstrated moments before. "So you abandoned an international career to care for her?" Victoria asked gently. "I didn't abandon it," Ryan corrected softly. "I chose. There are things more important than professional careers, Ms. Sterling. My mother sacrificed everything to raise me after my father died when I was 19. It was my turn to sacrifice for her." "And your mother? How is she now?" James asked, clearly moved by the story. Ryan smiled for the first time since he'd begun revealing his story, a sad but love-filled smile. The experimental treatment we found has slowed the disease progression significantly. Today, she lives in a specialized care facility in Queens that I pay for with my Red Bull savings. She's 71 years old, still recognizes me most days, and when she's having a good day, she still scolds me for not visiting often enough. But why didn't you return to Red Bull after stabilizing her treatment? Dr. Patterson asked. Surely they would have welcomed you back with honors. They would have, Ryan confirmed. In fact, I receive offers regularly, not just from Red Bull, but from Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren. The Formula One world is small, and experienced hybrid systems engineers are highly sought after. So why do you stay here? Richard insisted, genuinely intrigued. Ryan looked directly at Victoria before answering. Because I discovered something during these years, caring for my mother. I discovered there are different ways to make a real difference. At Red Bull, I helped millionaire drivers win races that other millionaires watched on television. Here, he gestured around the lab, here I can help American companies compete in the global market. I can teach young engineers. I can do something that actually impacts the lives of ordinary people. The revelation fell upon the group like a profound philosophical awakening. Victoria felt something stir within her chest, an admiration that transcended the purely professional. Ryan, she said calmly, do you have any idea what you've just done? Not just repair the engine, but give us a lesson in humility that we'll remember for the rest of our lives. That wasn't my intention, Miss Sterling. I just wanted to help. And you helped? Victoria smiled, feeling a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. More than you can imagine. But now I have a confession to make. Ryan looked at her with curiosity. When I made that crazy bet a few hours ago about you taking my job if you fixed the engine, I was desperate, but I was also following my intuition. Something told me you were special, that there was more to you than met the eye. Victoria paused, choosing her words carefully. Now I understand why. You're not just a talented mechanic. You're a reminder that a person's true worth isn't in what they appear to be, but in what they choose to do with their talents. Miss Sterling, Ryan began, but she held up her hand. Let me finish. Officially, you won the bet. You fixed the engine that seemed impossible to repair. Technically, my position is yours. Victoria smiled, but there was something mischievous in her eyes. But I have a counter-proposal. The entire room held its breath. How about instead of taking my job, you accept being my partner? Victoria extended her hand toward Ryan. Vice President of Advanced Technology Development at Sterling Automotive. Salary equivalent to what you earned at Red Bull, profit sharing, and complete autonomy to revolutionize our technical division. Ryan looked at the extended hand, then at Victoria's face, clearly surprised by the proposal. Ms. Sterling, that's very generous, but nothing, Victoria interrupted. Ryan, you just proved you can solve in 1 hour problems our team couldn't solve in 4 days. Imagine what you could accomplish with proper time and resources. Imagine how you could transform this company. And my mother, Ryan asked. I can't commit to international travel or schedules that would prevent me from caring for her. Your mother is welcome to move to the finest private care facility in Manhattan, with all medical expenses covered by the company, Victoria replied, without hesitation. And you work whatever hours you need to be present in her life. Richard observed the negotiation with growing fascination. Victoria, do you realize you're offering a building garage mechanic the second most important position in the company? Richard, Victoria turned to him with a smile. I'm offering the former chief engineer of Red Bull Racing the position he deserves. The difference is that now I know how to recognize talent, even when it comes disguised in work coveralls. Ryan remained silent for a long moment, processing the offer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an emotion he struggled to control. May I ask a question, Ms. Sterling? Why are you doing this? You barely know me. Victoria looked directly into Ryan's eyes, seeing there not just technical competence, but something rarer and more precious, genuine integrity. Because my father always told me that the best people are those who have both the ability to accomplish great things and the humility to do small things perfectly. You just proved you possess both qualities. And because, she continued, I'm tired of being surrounded by people who know how to talk about engines but don't know how to make them run. I want someone beside me who understands that building a company is like building an engine. Every component must function perfectly for the whole to reach its maximum potential. Ryan extended his hand and shook Victoria's, a firm grip that sealed more than a professional agreement. It was the beginning of a partnership that would change not only Sterling Automotive, but the lives of everyone involved. I accept, Miss Sterling, but with one condition. What's that? I want to keep working with my hands. I don't want to be just an executive who signs papers. I want to be in the workshop, teaching technicians, getting my hands dirty with engine oil when necessary. Victoria laughed, a genuine and joyful sound that echoed through the lab. Ryan, you just gave me one more reason to be certain I made the right decision. It was at that moment the phone rang again. Dr. Patterson answered, spoke briefly, and hung up with an expression mixing panic and excitement. The Japanese delegation just landed at JFK, he announced. They'll be here in 90 minutes for the presentation. Victoria looked at Ryan, then at the engine purring perfectly in the testing chamber. Well, partner, ready for your first meeting with international investors? Ryan smiled, and for the first time since entering that lab, he appeared completely relaxed. Ms. Sterling, after explaining to Christian Horner why a hybrid system failed at 180 miles per hour at Monza, explaining to Japanese investors how an American engine works is going to be a piece of cake. But as they prepared to receive the Japanese delegation, none of them imagined that the biggest surprise was yet to come. What the Japanese had to say would not only change the future of Sterling Automotive, but would reveal a stunning connection that none of them could have foreseen. 90 minutes later, Sterling Automotive's executive presentation hall had been transformed into a showcase of technological triumph. The engine that had been the source of desperation that morning now hummed proudly at the center of the room, its polished aluminum components reflecting the recessed lighting like precious metals. Victoria had changed from her charcoal suit into an elegant navy ensemble that radiated renewed confidence, while Ryan, still in his clean coveralls, made final adjustments to the demonstration setup. Nervous? Victoria asked quietly, approaching Ryan as he double-checked the diagnostic display connections for the third time. A little, Ryan admitted, his hands working with the automatic precision of someone who had done this countless times before. It's different from presenting to Red Bull. There, I knew everyone for years. Here, he gestured toward the doors where the Japanese would enter. I'm about to meet people who could completely change this company's future. Ryan? Victoria touched his arm lightly. You just saved this company. Be yourself, and everything will work out perfectly. Pete, at that moment the double doors opened, and Takeshi Nakamura entered, followed by a delegation of 3 Japanese executives, all wearing impeccably tailored dark suits. Takeshi was a 39-year-old man with perfectly styled black hair and eyes that seemed to evaluate every detail with mathematical precision. Ms. Sterling, Takeshi bowed respectfully. It is an honor to be here. We eagerly anticipate seeing the revolutionary engine that brought us to America. Mr. Nakamura, the pleasure is ours, Victoria replied, returning the bow with grace. Please allow me to introduce Ryan Mitchell, our new Vice President of Advanced Technology Development, who will be handling today's technical presentation. Ryan approached, discreetly wiping his right hand on his coveralls before extending it to greet Takeshi. Mr. Nakamura, welcome to Sterling Automotive. Takeshi shook Ryan's hand, but when their eyes met, something extraordinary happened. The Japanese executive's expression changed completely, shifting from professional courtesy to absolute astonishment, as if he had seen a ghost from his past materialize before him. Excuse me, Takeshi said slowly, studying Ryan's face with growing intensity. "Are you Ryan Mitchell, who worked for Red Bull Racing from 2005 to 2018? The silence in the room was instant and total. Victoria looked at Ryan with surprise. Richard nearly dropped the documents he was holding, and even the other Japanese executives seemed intrigued by their leader's reaction. "Yes," Ryan replied, clearly surprised. "Mr. Nakamura, do we know each other?" Takeshi began to smile, a smile that transformed into cheerful, genuine laughter that filled the room like music. "Know each other? Ryan-san, you saved my engineering career in 2012. The statement exploded in the room like a precision bomb. Victoria felt her heart accelerating, sensing that something extraordinary was about to be revealed. 2012? Ryan frowned, trying to remember. "Mr. Nakamura, Japanese Grand Prix Suzuka circuit," Takeshi explained, his professional formality giving way to genuine animation. "I was a senior engineer at Honda, responsible for supplying hybrid power units to various Formula One teams. Do you remember the catastrophic system failure that threatened to disqualify 3 teams during qualifying?" Ryan's eyes lit up with sudden recognition. The energy recovery system. The Japanese hybrid modules weren't communicating properly with the European telemetry systems? Exactly. Takeshi clapped his hands, clearly excited. All the senior engineers said it was impossible to solve in the 2 hours before the race. But you found the solution. The data protocol translation," Ryan murmured, memories flooding back like a waterfall. "The Japanese modules were operating on a different communication frequency than the European systems expected. We needed a real-time signal converter. And you built that converter using spare electronics from the Red Bull garage." Takeshi laughed again. "Ryan-san, because of your solution, 3 teams were able to race that day. Honda's reputation was saved, and I was promoted to chief engineer. 3 years later, I became technical director, and today I'm CEO of Nakamura Advanced Technologies." Victoria watched the conversation with growing fascination, realizing that destiny had conspired in an extraordinary way to bring these 2 men together again. "Mr. Nakamura," she interjected politely, "this means you've known each other for years." "We've known and admired each other's work for over a decade," Takeshi confirmed. "Ryan-san is a legend in the world of hybrid automotive engineering. When we learned that Sterling Automotive had developed a revolutionary engine, we came to investigate. But discovering that Ryan-san is involved," he paused significantly, "this completely changes our assessment." Ryan shifted uncomfortably with the praise. "Mr. Nakamura, you just happen to be one of the most brilliant engineers I've ever encountered," Takeshi interrupted firmly. "And now you're working with American technology. This is extremely interesting to us." "Mr. Nakamura," Victoria sensed the opportunity and decided to seize it. "Would you like to see our engine in operation?" "It would be an honor." Ryan approached the control panel and with a smooth movement activated the engine. The sound that filled the room was perfection itself, a deep, powerful rumble that vibrated through the floor and walls, making the crystal glasses on nearby tables resonate softly like wind chimes. Takeshi and his team approached the engine, observing every detail with meticulous professional attention. Ryan began explaining the technical specifications, his voice gaining confidence and authority as he spoke about his natural element. Hybrid supercharged V8-4, 2 liters with direct injection system specifically adapted for American fuel standards, Ryan explained, his hands gesturing precisely over the different engine components. The management system was recalibrated to optimize performance across varying fuel octane ratings, ensuring consistent output from coast to coast. "Fascinating," one of the Japanese engineers murmured, examining the hybrid components through an opening in the engine bay. "This fuel adaptation is something we've always struggled to implement effectively in our engines for the North American market." "Exactly the problem Ryan-san solved this morning," Victoria added. "Our engine was calibrated to European fuel specifications. In just 1 hour, he identified and corrected the adaptation issues for American fuel standards. Takeshi stepped back from the engine and looked directly at Victoria. "Ms. Sterling, may I be completely frank? Please. We came to America expecting to find an interesting engine produced by a promising American company. What we've discovered is far more valuable." Takeshi paused, choosing his words carefully. "We've found Ryan-san working with American technology. This isn't simply interesting, it's revolutionary." "How so?" Richard asked, clearly intrigued. "Ryan-san represents the perfect combination of international experience with local market knowledge," Takeshi explained. "At Nakamura Technologies, we constantly seek partners who can help us adapt our technology for specific markets. Ryan-san understands both cutting-edge global technology and the particular needs of the American automotive market." Victoria felt a wave of excitement coursing through her body. "Mr. Nakamura, are you suggesting a partnership?" "I'm suggesting something more ambitious." Takeshi smiled. "Nakamura Technologies would like to propose a $400 million investment in Sterling Automotive to create a joint USA-Japan development center with Ryan-san as chief technical director." The silence that followed was so absolute, you could have heard a pin drop on the plush carpet. Victoria felt her legs nearly give out and had to lean against the table to maintain her balance. $400 million. It was more than 20 times what she had hoped for in the original proposal. $400 million, she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "With one condition," Takeshi added, looking directly at Ryan. "Ryan-san must agree to lead the project. Without him, there is no investment." Ryan looked at Victoria, then at Takeshi, clearly processing the magnitude of the proposal. "Mr. Nakamura, this is an enormous responsibility." "Ryan-san," Takeshi said gently, "do you have any idea what it means for us to find you here? For 3 years, we've been searching for someone with your profile to lead our expansion projects in North America. Someone who understands both cutting-edge technology and local market needs. And here you are, in the perfect company at the perfect moment." Victoria looked at Ryan, seeing the hesitation in his eyes. "Ryan, you're worried about your mother, aren't you?" "Somewhat," he admitted. "This position would require enormous time commitment, total dedication." "Ryan-san," Takeshi interjected, "may I suggest something? What if we included in the project a world-class medical research facility right here in New York? Your mother would have access to the most advanced Parkinson's treatments available, and you would always be nearby." Ryan's eyes filled with tears, and he fought to control them. "Mr. Nakamura, that's more generous than I deserve." "Ryan-san," Takeshi placed his hand on Ryan's shoulder, "you saved my career once. Now it's my turn to help build yours." Victoria watched the scene with growing emotion, realizing she was witnessing something much deeper than a business negotiation. It was destiny conspiring to unite people who complemented each other perfectly. "Ryan," she said softly, "accept it, please. Not just for the company, but for you, for your mother, for all of us." Ryan looked around the room, seeing faces full of expectation and hope. When his eyes met Victoria's, something passed between them, a mutual understanding that transcended the purely professional. "I accept," he said finally, "but with one condition of my own." "What's that?" Victoria and Takeshi asked almost simultaneously. "I want Victoria to be my partner in everything, co-director of the project, co-responsible for all decisions. This is her company, and she understands the American market better than anyone." Victoria felt her heart soar like a rocket. It wasn't just a professional proposal. There was something in the way Ryan had said, "my partner," that carried much deeper meanings. "Ryan," she whispered, "are you sure?" "Absolutely sure. We're a team, Victoria, and the best teams work when each member perfectly complements the other." Takeshi observed the interaction between Victoria and Ryan with a growing smile. "Perfect. Nakamura Technologies accepts the condition. Victoria-san and Ryan-san as co-directors of the joint project. The following minutes were a whirlwind of handshakes, preliminary contract signings, and initial project planning. But Victoria could barely concentrate on the business details. Her attention was focused on Ryan, on the way he smiled when explaining future possibilities, on the passion in his voice when speaking about technological innovation. When the meeting finally ended and the Japanese left to dine and discuss contractual details, Victoria and Ryan found themselves alone in the presentation room, with the engine still purring softly, like background music. "We did it," Victoria said, still not quite believing what had happened. "We really did it." "We did," Ryan agreed, but his gaze was fixed on Victoria, not the engine. "Victoria, may I say something?" "Of course." When I woke up this morning, my biggest concern was rotating the tires on 6 cars in the garage. I never imagined I'd end the day as co-director of a $400 million project. Victoria laughed, a joyful sound that resonated through the room. "And when I woke up this morning, my biggest concern was explaining to Japanese investors why my $75 million engine wouldn't start. I never imagined I'd end the day with a partner who had already saved the career of one of them." "Victoria," Ryan took a step toward her, "there's something else I need to say." "What?" "Today, you gave me much more than a professional opportunity. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" "The passion for what I do. During these past few years, caring for my mother, working in the garage, I had forgotten what it feels like to create something new, to solve impossible problems, to make a real difference." Ryan stopped right in front of Victoria, his eyes shining with intensity. "You reminded me who I really am." Victoria felt her heart racing. "Ryan, and there's something more," he continued, his voice becoming softer. "Today, I didn't just rediscover my professional passion. I discovered something completely new." "What?" Victoria whispered, already knowing the answer from the way Ryan was looking at her. "I discovered it's possible to fall in love with someone in a single day, with their courage, their intelligence, their ability to see potential where others see only problems." Victoria felt tears burning behind her eyes. "Ryan, you can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my entire life," Ryan smiled, gently raising his hand to touch Victoria's face. "Victoria Sterling, will you be my partner not just in business but in life?" The question floated in the air like a promise, and Victoria felt that her entire life had led to this moment. A humble mechanic had walked into her boardroom that morning and changed everything: her business, her perspectives, her heart. "Ryan Mitchell," she whispered, covering his hand with hers. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." And there, beside the engine that had nearly destroyed her dreams but had ended up uniting their destinies, Victoria and Ryan kissed for the first time, sealing not just a business partnership, but the beginning of a love story that had started with an impossible bet and had transformed into the most beautiful future either of them could have imagined. 10 months later, Sterling Nakamura Automotive had become the most innovative hybrid technology company in North America. Victoria and Ryan worked side by side every day, creating revolutionary engines that were exported worldwide. Margaret Mitchell had been moved to the finest Parkinson's research facility in Manhattan, where she received experimental treatments that had virtually halted the progression of her disease. And when company employees told the story of how it all began, how a humble mechanic had saved the company and won the CEO's heart with an impossible bet, they always ended the same way. Sometimes the greatest miracles happen when we have the courage to trust in the impossible, and that was our story today. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, write in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one. Until next time.